I've been playing this Reap Blood Mage build for the last couple of weeks, and it is hands down one of the most fun builds I've ever played in PoE2. It has full screen shatter chains and good boss damage. It can run all map mods really comfortably, and although it struggles with low movement speed, which can be fixed at higher budgets, it doesn't really matter because this thing is just so much fun to play. I've had a lot of people come in chat and they just say, this looks really fun, I want to play this. And the good news is that it can be played on a lower budget of probably like minimum 5 divines, and then it can scale way up into like a couple of 100 divines. So you can get started on this build for like a low-ish amount, but there are plenty of really fun crafts for this. I have a full written mobilytics guide for the build. I recommend you read it. That'll also be links in the description. And I also have written and video guides for almost all of the crafted items. I will have it for all of them. I just haven't got around to the last couple of items, so I'll try to have those done by the end of the week. But with that out of the way, let's get into the build and discuss it. So the main skill we're using is Reap, which looks like a melee skill, but it's actually a spell. We're getting this from the Reaping Staff. This is an implicit skill. This thing has very high base damage, and you can only get it from this staff. So we need to be using this staff. But then the thing everyone asks about is the shatter chains. These are coming from Trampletoe. Deal 30% of overkill damage to enemies within 2 meters of the enemy killed. So if we're dealing massive overkill damage, which is damage above the enemy's maximum life, so if they have like 100 life and we'll deal 1,000, then we're going to get 30% of that additional 900 as overkill damage, which causes those explosions. So that's how we're getting the clear, and it's with these boots. The downside of these boots is they only have 15% increased movement speed. You can get a pair with Corrupted, 5% increased movement speed, and then when you can afford it, you can throw in a Farrell's Rune of the Chase for an extra 5%. This is quite expensive, but this is the core of the build, the Trampletoe and the Reaping Staff. Again, I have a guide on crafting both a budget and an endgame version of this staff. The budget one is like under 2 divines, and you get a really strong staff. But the important thing with Trampletoe is getting that overkill damage. So we need to have very high damage in order to be able to deal an excess amount of damage that then causes those shatter chains. So we're actually scaling our damage primarily with critical hit chance and bonus. So currently I have an 81% crit chance and then about a 600% crit damage bonus. It's actually a bit higher than that because we are using the Blood Witch. And the reason we're going Blood Witch is, firstly, Sunder the Flesh, base critical hit chance for spells is 15%. The base crit on Reap is 11, so we're getting another 4% base crit on that. What this means is, let's say you have 15% base crit, and then you get 100% increased critical strike chance, then you will have 30% critical hit chance. So that's why Sunder the Flesh is really nice. Then there's also Gore Spike, 1% increased critical damage bonus per 50 life. And we are stacking a fair amount of life. I've got about 4,700. And then we also get Sanguimancy, which gives us life remnants. So as you hit and kill enemies, these little blobs of life drop on the ground that restore your life. But they also allow you to overflow your maximum life, which means that you can get your life 1.5 times above the usual. So when I'm fully overflowed, I'm sitting at about 7,000 life, which is granting us an additional 140% crit damage bonus. This doesn't actually show on the skill sheet. I don't know if it's a bug. So we're actually sitting at about 740% critical damage bonus. Can actually get that much higher, but I have opted for a more movement speed, mapping focused version of this build, which I will discuss. The other thing we're getting is Vitality Siphon, just for a bit more recovery. 10% of spell damage is leached as life on top of life remnants. That's really good recovery. And then for mitigation, Grasping Wounds, 25% of life loss from hits is prevented. Then that much life is lost over 4 seconds instead. So all of this combined, it provides us very good damage. It provides us very good recovery and also very good mitigation. Let's go over the rest of the gear, and the most important unique is going to be Kaom's Heart. This is giving us 1,500 life, which is more life, but also more damage from our Ascendancy. These can be a little bit pricey. What you can do is search for a Kaom's Heart. By the way, you can find this by pushing / on your keyboard. Search for one with at least 2 rune sockets, You can see you can get like a badly rolled corrupted one with 1185 life for like 2 divines. You can also set the maximum life to 1500, and you can see these ones are about 5 divines. So this is on the budget version the most expensive thing, but you can get a cheaper version with badly rolled life. Something like this would be a great starter Kaoms for about only 2 divines. The next thing to discuss is the helmet, and a lot of people are using this, Veil of the Night. This has a massive 50% increased maximum life. If we equip this, you can see we go up to like 6,200 life, and it's big damage, but it has this downside. You have no elemental resistances. So when we equip this, this means that we have basically no elemental mitigation. So you're getting more damage, but you're losing, even though you're getting a huge amount of life, that's not enough to soak up the elemental damage that you're going to be encountering. So I've opted to not use this. Instead, what we are doing is getting a helmet with a high amount of flat life and then strength. Remember that strength will grant you +2 maximum life per 1 strength. So if you can get items with like this 26 strength, this thing's giving me 52 maximum life, and then resistances. And it's going to be similar on budget gloves like this with high life and resistances. These are actually not that expensive. You can search for a pair of gloves, let's just say with, I don't know, 150 life and then a total resistance of like 100. We can see what shows up. 1 annul, let's search by Exalted Orbs. 20x, 50x. With the price of divines being at about 300, this is like, I don't know, a 1/6 of a divine. Preferably search for ones that don't have evasion rating. So we want to say like a max of 0 evasion rating. And this is going to be armor and evasion bases, about a divine for these gloves. Of course, you can adjust these numbers to see cheaper ones. If you only go for 120 life, you see it's like 15x. Later on, we're going to be using things like this with cast speed and max life, crit bonus, socket gems. These things are a pain in the butt to make, but I do have a guide on them for when you are going to step up to the next level. So to start out, just high life resistance gloves. And the same thing with the belt. High resistance, high life, strength. Something like this is very cheap if we look for it on a belt. So for the belts, you can go pseudo, max life. You can even go as high as like 180 because strength will show up. Okay, maybe that's a little bit ambitious, but 150 and about a divine. And again, you can just adjust this to what you need. So something like this is only 20 Exalted Orbs. I recommend getting one like this. A utility belt is going to be best. 20% of flask recovery applied instantly. I'll explain why in a bit. But later on, we're going to craft new rings. And on these, we're looking for high cast speed and then resistances and life. And if you can get it, rarity as well. I haven't managed to reveal life. That's why this has mana. But the other one is fairly similar. Life, cast speed, resistances. And then once you have a couple of good rings, you can use an ingenuity, which is going to scale those values. So this is going to give us more resistances, more life, more cast speed. And then talking about the amulet, this one, again, I have a crafting video on it. It's way easier to make than it looks. Level of all spell skills, massive damage, life, and then cast speed, spell damage. These are all great for our build. Main things that are going to be scaling our damage are gem levels, plus level of all physical spell skills, level of all spell skills. Currently, I'm sitting at level 33 Reap. Level of all skills is huge damage. And then, like I said, crit bonus, crit chance, maximum life. That's the stuff that's going to give us big damage and allow us to get that overkill to get those shatter chains. When your damage is quite low, you're not really going to be feeling those shatter chains as much, but you hit a point where suddenly you're dealing enough damage and then you're getting that enough overkill that you get those shatter chains. As for our flask, Blood of the Warrior, this is actually very cheap. Try to get one with a high % of damage taken during effect recoup this life and increased duration. Other thing is just a flask with recovery on low mana or just a decently rolled flask. Charms are actually very important. Stun charm, so a stone charm, very good so that we're not getting stun locked. Silver charm to prevent slows, and then an anti-freeze charm with a thawing charm. Let's talk about the skills that we are using. So we've got Reap, and the primary supports I'm using are Physical Mastery and Heft. These are consistent. However, depending on whether you are mapping or bossing, I'm doing a little bit of a gem swap. Early on, what I recommend is just using Zenith and then Deliberation and Concentrated Area. Once you get a level 90 Reap staff with level 20 Reap, you'll get 5 support sockets. Before that, you're going to get 4. I've listed it on my Mobilytics guide when you get the breakpoints of the new number of supports, but until you get the level 20 Reap, you're only going to be on 4 support sockets. So to start out on a low budget, this is going to be your best damage setup, and having as much damage early on is very important to get the overkill from your Trampletoe. So for later on, when you have more damage and better gear, you're able to swap out these gems a little bit to have a bossing and a mapping setup. And I'm going to explain why. So let's just find a pack of monsters. But with Reap, there's actually like a built-in forward movement where you like jump forward at the monsters like that. And the thing with Concentrated Area is it reduces the size of just this initial Reap sweep. So if I stand here, you can see that's like, this is like just touching that pole. If I put in Magnified Area, it goes way past it. Doesn't look like that much further, but that's sitting more like at in those coffins. I moved. But this helps just with a more fluid playstyle. So when you leap toward enemies, your Reap actually hits, it connects with them. If you have too low area of effects, I've found that what happens is you will like leap at the monsters, swing, and then miss, and then just like do nothing. So instead, for mapping, when you have enough damage, you can pop in Magnified Area instead. Then instead of Deliberation, this gives us skills deal 20% more damage, but 30% more movement speed penalty. So I'll just show you what this looks like. So we leap at the enemies like that. But instead, if we're using rapid casting, this lets us leap toward the enemies much more quickly, like that. So this gives a much more fluid mapping playstyle. As for Zenith, I'm going to explain why we swap this out, but supported skills deal 30% more damage while you're above 90% of your maximum mana. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is the bossing setup. So for bossing, I'm using Concentrated Area, Considered Casting, less cast speed, but more damage. And then I'm also using Deliberation. And I'm not using Zenith, even though it looks like it gives us more damage, because I'm using a Chiming Staff, which grants us Sigil of Power. What Sigil of Power does is place Sigil on the ground, providing a powerful spell damage buff to you and allies while standing in it. The buff becomes more powerful the more mana you spend in it while standing in the Sigil. So what we do is we drop this Sigil on the ground, and then we need to spend mana. So we use our Reap. But wait, Reap has no mana cost because it's an intrinsic skill. So this has absolutely no mana cost. So for people thinking like, oh, why are we not using Atalui's Bloodletting or something like that? That's why. So what we do instead to spend our mana is we're using Vulnerability, curse enemies to bypass their armor. This reduces their armor, and it also happens to have a very high mana cost. So while we're in bosses, we can drop this nice big Sigil of Power and then keep spam casting these vulnerabilities up until we get 4 stacks of Sigil of Power, which grants us a massive chunk of damage. You can see we're at 1.5 million, and there we go down to 950,000. So this thing is giving us 50% more damage, getting 16% more spell damage per stage, times 4. That is a lot of extra spell damage. This is another reason I recommend using a utility belt for the flask recovery applied instantly, so that as you run out of mana, you can spam your mana flask and you get that mana back more quickly, because we need to spend a lot of mana to build up these Sigil of Power stages. One thing to quickly mention with Sigil of Power is that you can see the gem level determines how much % more damage you're getting per stage. So if we scroll down, there are these breakpoints where it goes from like 10% more damage per stage up to like 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So what we want to do is try and hit the next big breakpoint. So my Sigil of Power is sitting at level 25, which is giving us 16% more damage per stage. So what you can do is buy a chiming staff with level 19 or level 20, depending on your other gear, and then apply a perfect essence of sorcery to get this +5 level of all spell skills. And then you want to check over here and see, okay, so if I get a level 19 chiming staff, and then I have +3 on my amulet, and I now have +1, 2, 3, that gets me to 15. And then if I go another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now I'm sitting at level 27. So I'm actually sitting at 28, which gets us to over here, which is a really annoying breakpoint because it's 1 before. So I actually need to find another +1 level for my Sigil power. I think the only way I can do that is with that really expensive support gem. So when I get that extra level, then I'll be sitting at 17. But as you can see, having a level 20 is currently a bit of a waste because there's no difference between level 28 and level 25. Now, there's only one other skill we're using, and that is Bone Cage. Bone Cage releases these damaging spikes. This has a fairly high life cost, but what it does allow us is a bit of range. So if you're ever feeling a little bit threatened, you can throw out your Bone Cage at range, and that'll clear packs of monsters. And also, if you have high damage on that, then you are going to be able to shatter chain enemies. Now, you'll notice in the build guide and on my build, I have all these random skills. Spark, Detonate Dead, Flame Wall. What are these about? We're not actually using these at all, but there is an anoint that I really like, which is Gem Enthusiast. 5% increased max life if you have at least 10 red support gems, and 5% increased movement speed if you have at least 10 green support gems. Early on, this might be a little bit tricky because in order to have 10 green support gems socketed, you need to have 50 dexterity. What I recommend earlier on, if you're not able to make use of this yet because you don't have the dexterity, is to instead allocate Barbaric Strength, which isn't too expensive, and it gives us a massive 45% increase, crit damage bonus, and strength. And then the mana cost of skills doesn't matter because Reap has no mana cost. At a higher level, we can take Ingenuity, which allows us to change a lot of our int nodes into dexterity. But later on, if you can get a modifier like this, dexterity, or on a ring or somewhere on your gear, it does allow you to free up those points of the tree and then allocate them into strength. And since we're on the tree now, let's talk about this. So the tree is mostly going to be cast speed and then increased physical damage and critical chance for spells and critical bonus. Those are our main damage scalers. As for all of these small travel points, what we want to do is allocate as much intelligence as we need to use our skills. It's probably going to be about 157, sitting at 158, and then the rest needs to go into strength. Unless you need a few points for dexterity in order to use Gem Enthusiast. So the stat priority is going to be enough intelligence to use our skills and gear, and then a bit of dexterity for Gem Enthusiast if you need it, and then the rest of the points into strength. Kaom's Heart does have a fairly high 121 strength requirement, but because we are getting strength on other pieces of gear to scale our life, that shouldn't be too much of a problem, especially on belts and helmets. You can get a lot of strength there. The only other thing to discuss on the tree is Royal. So this thing is giving us 25% increased area of effect, and then these little travel nodes each give us 6% for a total of 43% increased area of effect, which, as I discussed earlier, is just to improve the feel of the build. Then the other thing to discuss are jewels. Heart of the Well. Damages extra cold is great. Damages extra lightning is great. And then also damage extra fire and chaos also nice to have. But I would prioritize, if you can get damage extra cold, damage extra lightning. And then increased skill speed is another great mod. So these are actually rolled as prefixes and suffixes. So extra cold or fire, lightning, chaos, those are prefixes. Skill speed is also a prefix. So you're never going to be able to get one with, let's say, damage extra cold, damage extra lightning, and skill speed. That you can't get that. You have to pick, let's say, damage extra cold, skill speed, and then the suffixes, the best ones are going to be stuff like critical damage bonus with spells and critical hit chance. So try and get one of these with as many of these mods as you can. Obviously, you might not be able to get all of them, but that's going to be best. Next I'm using a Time Lost Sapphire over here because this thing hits tons of notables. Spell passives in radius grant increased spell damage, and cold penetration. Cold penetration is like nice to have, but not really that important. And then the suffixes on notable passives grant increased hit chance with spells and increase spell damage bonus. So this is giving us nice crit bonus and crit chance, and then all these travel nodes are giving us a little bit of increased spell damage. Cast speed would also be really nice. I think you can also get increased effects of notables. Those are also really good. And then early on, I was using jewels like this, which have increased spell damage, increased hit chance for spells, crit damage bonus for spells, and something like increased cold damage is fine too. So getting some rare sapphires with just crit chance, spell damage, cast speed, all of those are really good. But later on, we're moving into more unique jewels. So to start out, someone suggested this on stream last night and I loved it. From nothing with passives in radius of Vile Pact can be allocated without being connected to your tree. This is like endgame because we're going to have to drop some damage in order to allocate this. But what this gives us is light on your feet, 3% increased movement speed, immune to maim and hinder. And then these each give us 2% increased movement speed, but also momentum. Ignore all movement penalties from armor and reduce slowing potency of debuffs on you. The ignore all movement speed penalties on armor is really good because Kaom's Heart gives us 5% less movement speed. We're already struggling with movement speed on this build, and having a minus 5% multiplier on any increased movement speed we get is just a pain. So this actually gives us like 7 or 8% increased movement speed. So when you can afford it, this is really nice. It's about 15 divines at time of recording, but it's like a luxury to have that. The other one I'm using, if you can find a Megalomaniac with just things on the tree that are good. So again, crit bonus, crit chance, cast speed. I currently have this one with explosive impact and mental alacrity, which allows us to get this for more increased area of effect, and burning enemies you kill have a 5% chance to explode. And over here, mental alacrity, which is getting hit by our Time Lost Sapphire and is granting us, by default, it grants us a bit of, I think, cast speed and intelligence and mana regen. If you don't have one that grants mental alacrity, I am taking these points. And if I was not using this from nothing, then I was taking these points over here. Spell damage, spell damage, spell damage, and potent incantation. So that is it for the jewels. One other thing to discuss is movement speed, because a lot of people do ask about this. We start out with very, very low movement speed. If you're going from a Deadeye to this, you're going to feel like you're permanently temp chained. But there are a few ways to get that increased movement speed. Easiest way, Trampletoe with a 5% movement speed corruption. What you can do is search for Trampletoe and then say movement speed, pseudo, and type in 20. And then also say with a rune socket. And you can see these ones, they're about 2 divines, 3 divines. But this is much cheaper than buying a 2-socket pair and then using 2 Farrell's Rune of the Chase. These things are very expensive. So to start out, what you can do is put in a robust rune for extra life or a resistance rune. But then when you can afford it, get a Farrell's Rune of the Chase for an extra 5% movement speed. Another thing you can do is getting a Darkness Enthroned. These things roll with, this item gains bonuses from socketed items as though it were there's a shield or boots or whatever, body armor, I think, and it rolls 50 to 100% increase effect of socketed items. So with this, you would get as though it were boots, and then we're gonna search for our well-rolled one. This is this is gonna be very expensive, but 100% increased effects. This is sitting at about, 6 orbs of annulment for a well-rolled one, which is about 3-4 divines. And then if you can afford it, Farrell's Rune of the Chase, put 2 of those in there and you're getting 20% increased movement speed. Also, there is Gem Enthusiast. This is another 5% increased movement speed. And then, like I discussed, from nothing, Vile Pact. This actually grants us a really, really good chunk of increased movement speed. Then the other thing is the Axe, Fall of the Axe. I haven't used this, but Onslaught gives us a little bit of extra movement speed while this is active. And then there was that rite of passage, which is very expensive with the Possessed by the Wolf. This is another 15% increased movement speed while it's active. And I think that's all that I've thought of. Maybe there's some like annoyance or other things you can put on, but I'm currently sitting at 37% increased movement speed. If I was using Darkness Enthroned, that'd be sitting at about 57. It feels like it's enough. It really does. Like when I swap over to my Deadeye, I realize how much faster that class is. But after you play this build for a bit, you really don't notice it too much. So don't forget, I have the build guide over on Mobalytics where I explain everything. Just read through it. Please read through it. I explain the leveling, what I recommend for leveling on the build, and I've written it all out for the budget, the low budget version, and then the end game version, and then I've also linked my exact build, and I've explained everything in the guide. I also have linked the various crafting guides I have done. So there's the budget Reap crafting guide, the Amulet, the Reap staff, the Cast gloves, the ring one I must still do, but you can see this will take you through the entire crafting process for each piece of gear. These ones I must still add some pictures for, but all of the crafting guides are there for now, except for the ring one. So just read the guide. All the info will be there. If you have any other questions, join the Discord or follow me on Twitch. I also stream on YouTube. So if you have any questions, go there, but this will be linked in the description. That's going to be it. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Catch you in the next video, and bye-bye.